of the Russian Empire through the use of satellites, and, if jammed, will be capable to counter jamming. However, given such a vulnerability, it is clear that the Russians can effectively respond in only one way: to engage in a massive high technology program of their own. Gorbachev, upon ascending to the Russian imperial throne, has already indicated as much. He has recently asserted that every school must stress training in cybernetics. But in doing so, he has accepted the devil's alternative. Again, one needs little imagination to see how vulnerable the Russian Empire would be if broader access in technology were allowed. If nothing else, Khomeini's tactics against the Shah immediately come to mind. The third stage, the liberation struggle and Western technology. To move from the second stage to the third stage, full access to Western technology by the liberation movements within the subjugated nations of the Russian Empire will help awaken and coordinate revolutionary struggles for national liberation has not yet become a reality. But let us contemplate its possible direction and possible outcome. A real hint available in the case of Poland's solidarity. On the one hand, thanks to the radio broadcasts from the West, the strikes and action in Gdańsk spread throughout Poland. On the other hand, the Polish Zomo police was able to paralyze solidarity by shutting down telephone services. Technology was instrumental in both events. Let us translate this scenario into a future when the West has made this technology available to it. The radio broadcasts should be enhanced by television broadcasts. Such broadcasts would allow increased coordination and stimulation, particularly if they enable emigre groups to hold up the symbols of national unity to those behind the Iron Curtain. Furthermore, in situation of revolutionary upheaval, the Bolsheviks would find the tactic of shutting down telephones ineffective. If New Kremlin spawned communications between various localities could be left open via Western satellites. The point seems clear. Through its technological aid, the West could give a new dimension to the resistance of nations subjugated by Moscow by making it truly mass-based. In my conclusion, if the resistance becomes massive enough, the Soviet-Russian Empire should conceivably crumble without the West firing a shot. The whole idea, in the final analysis, depends on the critical issue that the West recognize the subjugated nations as its strongest allies. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. and drink a toast to the European Freedom Council.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Stichko, sir, what can I add? Absolutely nothing to the speech which explains it all in relation to the Soviet technology, to its advancement, to Mr. Gorbachev and his smiling face at Geneva, which I am sure you will agree with me that his smiling face is no more or less than being just a peace-loving actor. The fireside summit may have warmed the feet of the President and Mr. Gorbachev, but millions upon millions of innocent people are freezing to death in Siberia. How appropriate it was for Mr. Stechko to elaborate on technology, on know-how, on computers that Soviet Russia, Mr. Gorbachev, would wish to acquire from the West. But how little do we note that the citizens in Soviet Union, and again, please forgive me if I don't repeat all the countries because we all know, many of them are starving, undernourished, overworked, overpaid, and tyrannized. And here we've got a gentleman who knows better than any of us, and he spoke, I am convinced, not only to us, but if only the world press gave a fraction attention to Mr. Stechko's speech as it gave to the two leaders, 3,000 plus journalists are waiting for no news. And here, in the past 20 minutes or so, the news that we have had, the speech that we have had, I am convinced would awaken many, many of our people in the Soviet Union and behind the Iron Curtains. Sir, we are grateful to you for having got the strength, the stamina, and the will, knowing that you got so much commitments throughout the world, and you have persevered in this weekend to be present on so many occasions right throughout the weekend, and here you are delivering a lecture which I am sure will be remembered for a very, very long time. Once again, sir, thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and long may you continue. And now, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, I'm going in reverse. Colleague parliamentarians, usually the third in pronouncement. I did omit it to introduce to you our dear friend, John Wilkinson, Member of Parliament, when I introduced right from the beginning all our guests. I am not sorry knowing that that wasn't planned, that he is sitting on my left. But all I would like to say about John, that I mean this sincerely, that I am delighted and really happy to know that I have the privilege and pleasure to serve with him in the House of Commons. He is a vintage parliamentarian, not only because his qualifications and his knowledge that he possesses and experience that he has gained, but also because he is dedicated not just to the House of Commons, and he is not dedicated to his own personal life, but he is dedicated worldwide for freedom, for democracy on our behalf. When I say ours, you may well question the validity of my interpretation, because I am British, naturalized, not nationalized, and a member of Parliament, secured, and therefore why I should say ours. And I tell you why. Because my family still suffers in the Ukraine, in Siberia, and millions like my families are still suffering. Therefore I am saying ours. And John is dedicated on their behalf that with God's help, one day they will be free. And knowing also very, very well that we have not only John, but so many other members of Parliament. And here it's a perfect example of Gary Worrell, who, as I say, have taken the time off, knowing that the weekend for every member of Parliament is a very precious weekend, because not only that one holds surgeries in one's constituency, one visits factories and churches and schools and old people's homes, but whatever he has done during the day, and I'm sure he must have done quite a lot, here he is with us, and I'm most grateful to you personally about it. And so with pleasure that I will introduce to you Mr. John Wilkinson, Member of Parliament. Now, very briefly again, because it's much too much that I would like to say about him, and everything nice, by the way, but sufficient to say that Mr. Wilkinson has been a Member of Parliament since 1974. In September of 1982, he was elected President of the European Freedom Council. Mr. Wilkinson has been a delegate to the Council of Europe and the Western European Union since 1979. He is the author of numerous books and brochures on military and political topics. He has been a member of various parliamentary committees and has been active in the field of race relations through various parliamentary groups. And wherever he travels in Europe, or in America, or in Canada, he never forgets of mentioning the oppressed nations within the Soviet Union and the satellite states. And I am personally most grateful to him that he raised the subject so often in so many parts of the world and in the House of Commons in particular. Ladies and gentlemen, pray your silence for Mr. John Wilkinson, Member of Parliament, who is going to address us. Mr. Wilkinson, please.
The Honourable Yaroslav and Madam Stetsko, Reverend Father, Stefan Terlecki, Gary Waller, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We've been very privileged this evening. I think we've heard a historic speech from one of the great men of our time. Yaroslav Stetsko's remarks were, in my judgment, exceedingly perceptive, brilliantly analytical, and above all, forward-looking. So many people, when they fight one battle or conclude one campaign, they have an instinct to consolidate. For Yaroslav and Madame Stetsko, the instinct is always to carry on and to take the battle further towards the enemy. And I find that very inspiring. And I'm sure that we all, when we go back and have the proceedings before us, will do well to study Yaroslav's remarks. I'm glad, ladies and gentlemen, you didn't ask me to sing for my supper. It's an occupational hazard for politicians But one of the delights of EFC, ABN and captive nation functions is that there are usually what Stefan Terlecki delightfully terms as after proceedings. And after proceedings means singing and music. And I'm delighted. And I was also delighted not so long ago to be able to invite Stefan Terlecki to come down and talk to my ladies. Now, it's not everybody in the House of Commons that I invite down to talk to my ladies. And when I say what that means, I must explain that coming down to talk to my ladies means coming down to give an address to the Ruislip Northwood Conservative Association Ladies Branch. And Stefan Terlecki did that with immense authority and charm. He held them spellbound. He spoke without a note. He spoke from the heart. And above all, he spoke from a deep experience, which very few of us English can match. And I think there's a very clear parallel between Stefan and Jaroslav. Maybe this is almost an inappropriate expression, but I don't think so. And I don't think it will be taken amiss when I say, Stefan, that perhaps you are a disciple of Jaroslav. And we're all proud, Jaroslav, to march in your army. And I hope that I'm not the little Johnny who's always out of step. But I don't want to give you heavy meat after a most excellent dinner and before entertaining after proceedings. But I am asked to talk about the European response to the challenge of SDI. And challenge it is, at many levels. We have in Europe to overcome a blank wall of skepticism and cynicism. In the old continent, we often feel, we've seen it all before. There's a world weariness about us, a déjà vu attitude. A tendency may be to treat too lightly exciting challenges which our American friends grasp wholeheartedly and with both hands. And so it was with SDI. For our American brethren, and brethren they are because we are one Atlantic community, we are essentially one people, and one only has to be at a gathering like this to realize it. For our American friends, strategic defense is almost an ethical imperative. There is a moral dimension to it. The President is keen to move away in international relations from a mutual balance of terror, away from the doctrine of mutual assured destruction. And I think many of our peoples yearn for the day when their families, children, friends, cities, and civilization won't have to be held hostage in the awesome process of deterrence. Some say, and most of all the Soviet propagandists, that it is on the contrary morally wrong to militarize space and to use space technology for military purposes. But the Soviets, of course, for many a long year, have based their space program very largely on military objectives. And a very high proportion of funding comes from their military budgets. And when people say that Star Wars, as they erroneously term it, is to militarize space, and when they rail and decry this process, they somehow inexplicably forget that ever since Werner von Braun and his team of brilliant scientists at Peenemünde on the Baltic coast evolved the V-weapons, space has been used for military purposes, and there is no more awesome example of man's capability to use space than the ballistic missile, which has, of course, quite changed the nature of international relationships and military strategy. Now, when we Europeans come to face the consequences of SDI, we wonder in what forum we should do it. Should we do it within the ambit of the EEC? But the European community is an economic arrangement. The Treaty of Rome has no security provisions. And anyway, there are members of the EEC like Ireland, which is neutral, and Greece, which is less than wholehearted in its commitment to the alliance, which would make an examination of SDI within the EEC inappropriate anyway. Then there's NATO. This is more suitable. But here again, the forum is so large, and it encompasses such a disparity of nations, from the Turks on the Bosphorus, who have no space or high technology capability of any substantial size, to the Norwegians, the Spaniards, the Danes, and so on. It would be very hard to achieve an identity of view from such a huge organization as NATO. And then there's the Western European Union, the Mutual Security Pact that actually predated NATO, an organization of 7 member countries: Benelux, Germany, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom. And this body is statutorily empowered and specifically tasked to deal with foreign policy and with defense. The Ministerial Council of WEU met in Bonn in April, only a few months after the much celebrated 30th anniversary relaunch of NATO, of WEU, and have come to no firm conclusions. And that's even after passing my report in the Assembly, which advocated very strongly that the WEU countries should evolve a joint response to SDI. Then, having discarded or been unable to come to a joint position in WEU or NATO, or certainly not in the common market, the Europeans are forced to fall back on national responses. And I'll take the 4 principal industrial powers of Western Europe. The UK position has firmed. Initially, there was great skepticism in the Foreign Office. Maybe our Mandarins are paid to be skeptical. And Sir Geoffrey Howe gave a speech at the Royal United Services Institute for Defence Studies about SDI, which quite candidly begged more questions than it answered. But in recent months, as the potential benefits of industrial partnership and technology have become plain, our Secretary of State has gone to Washington. The Prime Minister made a very forthright statement in favour of the research programme at a meeting of both houses of Congress, and we've moved forward in the UK. So have our German friends. And quite honestly, the Federal Republic and the United Kingdom see more or less eye to eye on SDI. The French have a much more equivocal position. They have a position that is quite honestly unique within the alliance in that ministerially, at a governmental level, they don't wish to lend official support to SDI. But of course their industrialists are thrilled and delighted at the prospects of the contracts that they might win. And in WU we had a first-rate conference on the défi spatial pour l'Europe, the space challenge for Europe, in Munich in September. And it was noteworthy to hear the French Minister for Science and Technology, the former Director General of CNES, the French National Space Agency, Monsieur Lucien Curien, give a speech where he had to toe the party line, because that's what it is, the line of the socialist government, which was critical of SDI. But the industrial spokesmen from Aerospatiale, Marcel Dassault and so on, of course, were very keen that they should participate. And the Italians too have a certain ambivalence. Their government is again not willing to lend its imprimatur to SDI, but its industrialists, Salinia, Air Italia, Telespazio and so on, are again very keen. So I do believe that there is steady but modest progress being made within Europe to participate in SDI. But what is SDI? If you said to someone in the street, what's SDI? I expect 85% of them wouldn't have a clue. If you said, what's President Reagan's peace shield? I don't think they'd have a clue about that either. Star Wars, they would probably think it is the President's research program rather than the movie these days. But there is a problem over nomenclature, and it's a problem, of course, of the Soviets' concussion. The critics of SDI within Europe will say it is an effort just to build an umbrella over the United States. And the Americans couldn't give one whit for the security of their European or other allies. They will be safe in their American heartland, and the others can be attacked or go communist. Doesn't matter. The Americans will be safe, and that's all that worries them. This, of course, is totally removed from the truth. The truth is that it is a space-based defense system that's being researched, and the whole merit of a space-based defense system is that it is global in its application, particularly those elements of it that will be designed to intercept missiles in their boost phase and mid-course phases. Those will have intercontinental capabilities, and therefore the Americans will be providing a shield to ensure the peace of the world. And then anyway, what is so inherently wrong to seek to defend cities and peoples and our homelands against ballistic missile attack? No one criticized manned fighter forces when they were the defense of our nuclear deterrence, when our nuclear deterrence were the manned bomber bases of Strategic Air Command or British Bomber Command. That was regarded as perfectly natural. I would have thought myself that the more awesome the weapons of mass destruction, the more important it is to provide a defense for our peoples. It really is an extraordinary doctrine that they must be left forever and forever vulnerable. Then it's alleged that SDI will decouple, in jargon, Europe from the United States. Again, a red herring, literally a red herring. It will not do that. The great fear of the Europeans has always been that our American friends, in the ultimate scenario of aggression upon Europe, will not be prepared to invoke the US nuclear guarantee on our behalf for fear of the devastation of their own homeland. And that's why it has always been important, and de Gaulle and others have argued it, for the British and French to retain an independent national centre of nuclear decision this side of the Atlantic. But if the American people, and the political leadership, and the military commanders feel that to respond, even in a nuclear way, to a Soviet attack upon Western Europe will not be necessarily to render the whole of the American heartland vulnerable to a Soviet strategic nuclear response, then the Americans are more likely to be prepared to invoke the nuclear guarantee on our behalf, and of course, most important of all, the Soviets are less likely to attack in the first place, and therefore deterrence will be increased, not decreased, and the risk of war diminished and not increased. Then people say, oh, but deterrence has worked so well, and it will be destabilizing, the diplomats say, to go ahead after SDI and to build space-based or strategic defenses. But I don't think that the mutual balance of terror is something that has the wholehearted support of the majority of our electorates. One is only to see the peace movements on the march and to hear the critical commentators in the media to realize that the mutual balance of terror is something which people from churchmen to academics, from ordinary housewives to politicians, are rightly and understandably worried about. And the Soviets do their level best to destabilize anyway by trying to outstrip the West, both at an intermediate level and at a strategic level, by building up ever bigger offensive nuclear arsenals. So why is it going to be destabilizing to diminish the capability of those overweening offensive nuclear arsenals? Not going to be destabilizing. It will be a factor for stability and for peace. Then people will say, oh, but it's so expensive. Well, the arms race itself has proved massively expensive. With each generation, the degree of modernity and sophistication required of the delivery systems has augmented at a rate way above the level of inflation. And the cost of the proliferation of defensive systems is crippling. Now, if, albeit at great cost, we can deploy strategic defenses that are effective, then there will not be such a need for massive offensive systems, because the strategy now is very much counter-force rather than counter-city. And an adversary would try and knock out the West's retaliatory forces. Now, if that possibility is denied to him, then our retaliatory forces can be smaller. And at least there is a possibility for costs to be kept under control. Then they say, but it will accelerate the arms race. Well, as I've said, the arms race has been accelerating steadily, and the main impetus has been Soviet. And I believe that the Soviets will reach the point, if the US construct effective strategic defenses, where they will not be able either to afford to saturate the defenses or to improve their delivery systems to an extent that they will be able to penetrate the defenses, and therefore strategic defense will be a factor for arms control and mutual balance verifiable disarmament. And then, last but not least, people say, but it won't work. Well, if there's so much against it, it's such a bad thing, why are they so anxious if it won't work? But of course, this is very much to underestimate American capabilities. Who would have guessed when President Kennedy said that men should be on the moon by the end of the 60s, that they would actually achieve it? Our American friends, when they set objectives, they tend to realize them. One is only to see the success of the homing overlay experiment over the Pacific, where a missile was shot down in mid-course, and to see the progress of the ASAT program, whereby an anti-satellite missile launched by an F-15 actually works. One is only to see these and the success of the shuttle program to realize that strategic defense, American style, is more likely to succeed rather than the contrary. And that's why, of course, the Soviets are worried, because it's likely to succeed, not because it's likely to fail. And then we get into the area of atmospherics. People say, but if you're going for SDI, what will the Soviets think? It'll upset them. It will be provocative. You don't understand, they say, Soviet perceptions. The trouble is, I think, that the President of the United States and his advisors, particularly Mr. Weinberger, understand all too well what Soviet perceptions are, and what they see they don't like, and what they see they rightly have to guard against. And I don't think it should be a factor in our policy making, ladies and gentlemen, to tailor our policy to the misconceptions, to the propaganda, to the perversions of truth, and the falsehoods of the Soviets. Now, if they are trying to bamboozle their peoples into thinking that strategic defense is somehow a threat to them, we shouldn't encourage them with that process. So, when people suggest, ladies and gentlemen, that SDI is just a means of enabling President Reagan to do what he's always wanted to do, fight a nuclear war, launch a preemptive strike against the United States, we must really answer back this fanciful and slanderous propaganda. The annals of history are littered with the casualties of Soviet aggression, but our American friends have proved bastions for peace, and the refugees across the Iron Curtain, they're always going one way. We must indeed answer propaganda with truth. That's where the low frontier comes in. It's a hearts and minds campaign that we have, I think, sharpened this weekend. And it's a hearts and minds campaign that is, in essence, so easy. Why should people look at the crystal ball when they can read the book? Or, as was said so much more eloquently by General Jack Singlaub the day before yesterday, there's the KAL 007 episode, the starving people in Ethiopia, the invasion of Afghanistan, the refugees, and so on. We have plenty of examples to bring before them. We don't need any criminologists to explain what the truth is. But we do need to launch an offensive in this area of psychological warfare, and no one has put it better than Jaroslav Stetsko. I think we ought to engage not in active measures necessarily only, but in negative measures too. By negative measures I mean no grain sales to the Soviet Union, no technology transfer, no sanctioning of big commercial deals that build up the strategic industrial potential of the Soviet Union, no easy credits, no energy purchases, big gas deals that provide the hard currency and so on which enable them to buy arms. We've got to maintain the liberation struggle because it has been seen that communism can be rolled back. And like a carpet, it's rolled back often from the edges most effectively. And one has seen how vulnerable they actually are. We've seen, for example, Grenada turned into a democracy. We have seen the Russians expelled from Egypt. We have seen the Soviet influence removed from Somalia. There are other examples too, and it can be done. And no one knows more about how it can be done and put it across more effectively than the Stetskos and General Jack Singlaub and Dr. Morgan and Mr. Murphy and all the other fine speakers that we had. I do think that we've also got, and this is my concluding thought, to guard our home base. It's all very fine constructing strategic defenses. All very fine encouraging the liberation struggle and rolling communism back. But it's no good if we're going rotten at home. And this is why I was so impressed by the youth panel. I think it was one of the outstanding contributions of an outstanding conference. It's no good letting the likes of the militant tendency, Arthur Scargill, Mr. Hatton and co in this country literally run riot. It's no good seeking soft and easy options, because in so many Western countries, the hard left, the Marxist-Leninists, are let into power by default, because the forces mobilized against socialism and communism are often split. And this is a fatal weakness. The communists know well the validity of the old Roman imperial maxim, divide et impera. So to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I do hope that you will feel that the theme of our conference has been valid. I do hope and feel that you will go back, as I will, to the daily round of work and duty, inspired, better equipped, with a deeper understanding, trained to this liberation struggle. But before I conclude, I would just like to do a very small little thing, a tiny personal gesture. Yaroslav and Slava are very special people in every way. And one of the ways in which they are particularly special is that they're not shy of their beliefs. They stand up for all they believe in, and they challenge us to do likewise. And the causes that they espouse are written deep on their hearts. And the cause, of course, is liberation of the captive nations, the defeat of communism, and the establishment of democracy and freedom in countries which know them not. So, in this 400th anniversary year of the city of Westminster, where we're actually dining tonight, I would like to present symbols of the Mother of Parliament, the House of Commons, the Westminster badge, both to Yaroslav, a pendant to wear around her neck, close to her heart, and some cufflinks for Yaroslav, because like the fine man that he is, he has his heart, as we say, on his sleeve. Associated with the name of Yaroslav and Slava. ABN.
Before I thank John for his excellent speech, may I apologize for my neglect and omission not to introduce right from beginning the Reverend Father Leszczyszyn, who is with us here this evening. I am sincerely sorry. Father Leszczyszyn. Ladies and gentlemen, John, what can I say? After all, John is an expert on military affairs and military issues. He said so not just this evening, but he speaks throughout the weeks, throughout the months, throughout the years in many parts of the world. You may or you may not know that he also is a fighter pilot in his own right, a test pilot and an instructor. So who knows better than to talk on military issues? He spoke so much about defenses and offenses and on the SDI. I am sure that you all will agree that the SDI does not stand for Star War. It is not designed to shoot any stars whatsoever, except the Red Star, and I'm not against it. John? John, I am most grateful on behalf of everybody here present. Thank you very, very much indeed. Also knowing how busy you are and how busy have you been during this week and this weekend. And here you are amongst us, as usual, not only supporting us, but giving us a lecture on military issue and military affairs as they are presented to us on both sides of the Atlantic and Soviet Union, USA, Europe, and the Soviet Union. And all I would say to you, John, please try to give this type of lectures to as many people as possible so that Mr. Gorbachev and his geriatrics in Kremlin will never be in a position to convince our free and democratic people that they are right and we are wrong. On the contrary, we are right and they always will be wrong. Well, I never had any opportunities to untie any ribbons except at Christmas Day from under the Christmas tree when my children say, Father, will you open so-and-so ribbon because I want to know whether it is my present or not? And I do it gladly as a Father Christmas. Well, here, I'm not a Father Christmas, I can assure you. But with mystery, curiosity, and indeed a pleasure, I'm going to untie this yellow ribbon over the scroll, which I don't know what it contains, and I'm not even so sure who is going to receive it. Nevertheless, life is full of mystery and curiosity, and I'm just as curious as everybody here present. My goodness. Award of Merit presented to Honorable John Wilkinson, Member of Parliament, for outstanding support of the liberation struggle of Ukraine and other subjugated nations for national independence and human rights. Ladies and gentlemen, on your behalf, I shall pass this scroll to our dear friend, Mr. Od.зб, who will officially present this scroll to Mr. John Wilson, Member of Parliament. deserts. How little did Mr. John Wilkinson know when he read his notes, literally like this, when he was checking his notes, that this excellent sculpture is going to be presented to him as well. And it is our own Cardinal Joseph Slipay, Patriarch, who I'm sure I have not need to explain to you the background of this great Christian man. I'm sure that I also do not need to explain to John about our great Christian leader who regrettably passed from us in 1984. Sufficient to say that for 18 years of his life he was tortured, tyrannized, oppressed in slave labor camps in Siberia, and with God's help he managed to survive because he believed in God, he believed in justice, and he believed in freedom. If we follow his example, which I'm sure we all do, then justice will prevail, and all the people, like he and us, are praying for to receive this justice from God, will be one day fulfilled. John, I am very pleased and honored to present you this beautiful statuette. Ladies and gentlemen, on some lighter note, and I am sure that an evening like this must not go without have some of lighter but also appreciative. I am not putting it in a true sense of the word, but an entertainment, because some could be very nostalgic, some could be entertaining. Nevertheless, that doesn't matter. What matters is that we are looking forward to Mrs. Lilia Zobens, a Latvian soloist who is going to sing for us, and Mr. Leslie East, who is going to accompany her on the piano. Mrs. Zobens.
As I understand, there are very few Latvian speakers present. I think I'd better tell you a little about the two songs I'm going to sing. There are two Latvian folk songs in arrangement by Wolfgang Stādniņš. I don't know what in the Ukraine, who or what brings sleep to young babies, but in Latvia it's usually the little mouse in a creaking cart. And so you understand the first song is a lullaby, but don't worry, it's never worked on my daughter yet. Probably won't do it now either. The little mouse will bring sleep. Please bring sleep to our house because we have lots of children here. A little handful for this one, a handful for that one. But for little Johnny, a great big scoop, please. A young man who goes out riding on his bay horse looking for a wife. First he rides to the rich mother's daughter, but he finds her having an argument with her mother, and as this doesn't bode well for a happy married life, he decides to go looking elsewhere, and he goes to the little orphan girl's house, and he finds her very industriously sweeping out the house, so he decides to take her for his bride, and he asks her, "Be my bride, be the keeper of my house keys."